So the book launch is for People Power, History, Organizing, and Larry Goodman's Democratic Vision in the 21st Century, edited by Wesley C. Hogan and Paul Ortiz. So again, you have that information and you can be part of that, that initial presentation about the new book. But today we're going to start a series dealing with history in St. Augustine, not the ancient history going back to 1565, but history going back to 1960, 62, and the beginning of the civil rights movement. And of course, St. Augustine was a hotbed of activity in the civil rights era. Indeed, some of Paul's colleagues on the history faculty were arrested participating in activities there in the 60s. So before Paul even arrived, there were oral histories being done through the Proctor program. And then a few years ago, I can't remember how many, but a board on which I served in St. Augustine, the University of Florida, and started St. Augustine Incorporated, provided grant funding for a couple of years for Paul and his colleagues to do oral histories with the surviving members of the Black community who were participating in those 1960s activities. So today is really going to be an introduction by Paul and his colleagues about activities in St. Augustine over the years. And in the following weeks, we will be presenting some of those oral histories. They're different in length, and so I think that your program tells you how long each one is, and you can gauge your time from that.
I want to skip forward a little bit to the August 10th conversation with Mike Gannon, David Chalmers, and David Colburn, because this for me is also very personal. I had just the great privilege and luck, good luck, to know Mike Gannon, David Chalmers, and David Colburn. I know that many of you on this session today knew these incredible colleagues and friends very well, and I want to take a minute to kind of honor them, to think about what it meant to have three people of the quality and the caliber and just the love that these men had for our community, had for each other. I was so blessed to be able to see them together on a few occasions. One, they used to get together for a lunch, and I was invited two or three times to this kind of lunchtime gathering as kind of the junior person, getting trained to become a progressive historian. And it was such, and believe me, when they got together and I joined them, I said hardly a word. I was just there really to listen. I was in my office, historian's mode. But I remember what David Chalmers used to say about Dr. King, and he would say that he was just this extraordinary man who was had courage, was practical, but was also a visionary. And David Chalmers had so much regard for Dr. King in many ways. And David, you have to remember now, his scholarship was well in advance of most scholars at the time on the civil rights movement. And when you see that conversation on August 10th, that was reported shortly after the MLK holiday was inaugurated in the United States. In fact, I think the proper mindset, Roy, to keep in mind for that August 10th conversation, and conversation, of course, was the title of Mike Gannon's program, was that there was still a lot of opposition to the National Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. And so it took some courage on Mike Gannon's part to really call together David Chalmers and David Colburn and to say, let's take stock of Martin Luther King Jr. Let's think about what this day means as not just this abstract holiday, but really what Dr. King means to the United States. And so it's a really powerful session. Before I introduce Annemarie and Raja, I wanted to leave a little bit of time to, again, answer any questions that you may have about St. Augustine. I also want to give you a couple of resources. I'm not going to do the Zoom thing. What I'm going to do, or I'm sorry, I'm not going to do what you call it, the screen sharing thing. I'm just going to type in a URL here or paste in something, and I'll explain why I'm going to do this in a minute. The link I just pasted to you, copied in the link, and in the chat bar rather, is the entryway into the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program's collections on St. Augustine, the video and audio collections. And also, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat bar as I'm kind of wrapping up here. This link is a link directly to the Proctor program's, what we call our YouTube channel. And Deborah Hendrix, who many of you know, who has been at Oakhammock on many occasions, has interviewed many people. Deborah is our technical genius coordinator, as Annemarie and Roger can attest. And Deborah has set up this incredible resource for us, for teachers, researchers, general public members. This is the link that gets you to a lot of the St. Augustine content. Some of it you will be watching as part of the series, but actually most of it you won't. So I just want to take a few minutes to explain a few highlights to you.
Hey, Paul, this is Julianne.
Yes, Julianne.
I can send everyone who's registered for the class that link from chat, so no one needs to worry about copying down that long address.
Thank you so much, Julianne. That would be incredibly helpful. And I'll just describe a few of the bigger items on there. The first thing that shows up, and again, this is, you get through this, if you kind of get lost or you want to look at the oral history program's link, you can dial in directly to the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, scroll to the bottom of our webpage, and just click the YouTube icon. And that will get you to this page. And then you click videos and then do a St. Augustine search. The first thing that comes up is a piece of an interview with Robert Haling, Dr. Robert Haling. Dr. Haling was a person who was a leader of the movement long before the spring or summer of 1964. He was a person who risked his life, whose life was in jeopardy. It's a very powerful rumination and interview about the conditions that African Americans faced in St. Augustine leading up to the 64 movement. Of course, you see the Justice Symposium with the rabbis who had returned to St. Augustine for this 40th anniversary reunion. It was quite interesting at the time. Some of the rabbis said, we never really, after being in Florida, we vowed we would never return to Florida because we didn't receive a great reception the first time. But I think they were all quite happy that they did return. Now, more recently, we also filmed the Proctor program, did a video recording of the 8th annual commemoration of the largest mass arrest of rabbis in U.S. history. That took place just a few weeks ago, June 18, 2021. That's another item. A little further down, you will also see the interview that Annemarie and Raj will be talking about with Mr. James Jackson. It's one of the best oral history interviews I've ever heard. I mean, it's really very powerful. Raj and Annemarie did tremendous work in kind of not just that one interview, but the whole summer that the two of them worked in St. Augustine, as Roy mentioned, thanks to that kind of support, and also the support of the Lincolnville Museum. Now, I want to, while I'm talking about the Lincolnville African American History Museum, I want to lift up that museum for your attention. If you're wanting to do an activity that kind of supplements or accentuates what you're doing in this ILR series on St. Augustine, I highly suggest you go and you actually visit at the Lincolnville Museum in St. Augustine. It is in, as many of you probably know, it's in what used to be the physical space, which was Excelsior High School, the segregated Black high school in St. Augustine. What they've done to that museum, they've transformed it. It has a great collection, very diverse collections in African American history going back to slavery times, and a lot of material connected to 1964, but not just 1964. A lot of great material in Black history in the decades around the antebellum period, Civil War, early 20th century, et cetera, et cetera. So I really highly suggest you check out St. Augustine. We also have material which is connected to St. Augustine after 1964. And many of you are familiar with the controversies surrounding the Confederate monuments in St. Augustine, the two major ones, but the one which was on property managed by the University of Florida. We have extensive oral history interviews on our site with individuals who talk about that controversy about the Confederate monument. So that's there as well. We also have a number of oral history interviews. Here's a really exciting collection. In 2012, and by now you're kind of figuring out. I mean, I could talk about St. Augustine forever. It's such an amazing place. St. Augustine always brings these incredible things together. And one of the things that happened in St. Augustine during the colonial period, and those of you familiar with the work of Kathy Deegan, Dr. Kathy Deegan, we have an oral history interview with her. There's actually more than one. On this page, there's an audio interview that I did with Dr. Deegan in 2012. Those of you who know of her work know she's a powerhouse. She's an internationally renowned archaeologist. And when she and her team of all female archaeologists rediscovered what was known in the vernacular as the Negro Fort, or Fort Mose, which was a fort that was staffed by formerly enslaved African Americans who were defending the Spanish colony at St. Augustine. And I know when I was in college, learning about a Negro fort or Fort Mose kind of blew my mind. I'm like, wow, I want to get to know about this remarkable place where African Americans who escaped from the British Empire colonies north, especially in Charleston and Low Country, South Carolina area, if they were able to escape into Florida, they could find a provisional kind of freedom with the Spanish crown. But that freedom required you, one, to convert, obviously, to Catholicism, to swear fealty to the Spanish crown. Most importantly, your freedom as a Black person was contingent on your willingness to defend physically the colony. And the English settler colonists waged these really incredibly violent attacks. Those of you familiar with St. Augustine history, and the brunt of those attacks were borne by people at Fort Mose. But Dr. Deegan's team was the team that really actually rediscovered where that fort was. And she tells that really powerful story. And one of the things I wanted to share with you was just, these things kind of, these ideas kind of pop into your mind. Usually I get these kind of brainstorms, Roy, when I'm on an uphill incline riding my bike and the oxygen level kind of goes down. But I remember Kathy saying that when her team really narrowed and finally realized they had found the site at Fort Mose, and they went to kind of the city fathers of St. Augustine to present their story. And that now she tells the story much better than I can, right? I'm just giving you the secondhand story from the oral history. When Kathy presented that finding to to the city fathers in St. Augustine. They said, "Oh no, Negro Fort can't be that close. It can't be as close as you say it is. It's way further away." And she's like, "No, this is science, y'all. This is where it is." And it's such a really powerful story about the importance of scholarship, like the work that we do as scholars, as public thinkers. And so that's a really fun interview. And like I said, I could talk about the St. Augustine interviews forever. There's also a number of oral histories and materials connected to Dr. Mike Gannon, or as he was known before he became a history professor at UF, Father Mike Gannon. And so I had the opportunity to interview him about his work on St. Augustine. That's also in the collection. It's an audio interview. And also individuals like Herschel Shepard and people who also were connected, and Roy can give you more information on this, people who are connected to cataloging and archiving and telling us the architectural histories of St. Augustine. So the Proctor archive, and by the way, all of our interviews eventually end up at the University of Florida Digital Collections or the UFDC at Smathers Libraries. Now, all these oral histories that I'm talking about are accessible not only to us, but to anyone who has access right now to the internet. And so we're continually working with our dear colleagues at Smathers Libraries to make these as accessible and as findable as possible. And that's an ongoing struggle in and of itself, because oftentimes it involves digitizing older materials. Now, these include when David Colburn went to write his incredible book about St. Augustine, he did a number of oral histories. We have found a few of those, and we're still looking for more of those. We're always cataloging and digitizing and trying to make material available. And so I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. If you have questions, and then I will introduce Annemarie and Raj. I didn't see Raj yet on the call, and then I'll have to kind of, again, I have to apologize, but I have to zoom off and rejoin my students. But if anyone has any questions, if you put them in the chat bar, if you want to just ask them, I'd be happy to answer them during the few remaining moments I have with you. Barbara asked, did I hear from Robert Ziegler when he was here? Yes, Bob Ziegler, of course, was part of that crew. I just how lucky we were to have, people like Bob Ziegler, who was a nationally renowned labor historian. And I just could, and Bob was one of the first people who called me when the directorship of the Proctor program became open. I mean, that's how I got here, by the way. And I don't know if I've ever told this story publicly, but it's my Sheila. Many of you know my wife, Sheila. Her mom had been diagnosed with Parkinson's in the summer of 2008. And Sheila grew up in Homestead, Florida. And we realized we needed to get back to the South. And I thought, well, how are we going to do that? And I got a call one day from Bob Ziegler. I got a call another day from David Colburn, one right after the other. And they said, Paul, how come you haven't applied yet for that directorship of the Proctor program? And I said, I didn't know that was a job opening. And they said, oh yeah. So Bob was had a big impact on the University of Florida. Again, a renowned labor historian and just a wonderful being.
Any questions here from you, crew?
But any questions, and Roy, you may have to repeat the ones from the floor because the game from here is not great.
I will. I don't see a hand raised at the moment.
Okay.
So let's proceed, and you can introduce.
That's fine. So what I want to do now, and I can only see, I'm looking at the participants. Is Raja here yet?
Raja is here.
Okay, wonderful. So I get now to turn the program over to two amazing oral historians. And Annemarie Anderson, I'll just give both of them a very short introduction. Annemarie was an undergraduate at the University of Florida. she was the first student who actually completed what we call a 4-in-1 master's degree at UF in oral history. And she wrote a wonderful senior thesis. She did an incredible project for MA. But one summer, she worked with Roger Rahim the whole summer doing field work in the ancient city and working with guides and supervisors at Lincolnville Museum. Annemarie is now the historian for Southern Foodways, which is based at the University of Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi. She writes frequently on oral history topics and continues to do incredible oral history work. And I think as she'll tell you, doing work in St. Augustine was an important springboard for her. Raja Rahim recently finished her PhD at the University of Florida. She wrote her dissertation about the rise of Black college basketball in the United States and its many intersections with the modern civil rights movement. Raja, literally the day she finished her dissertation, also received a tenure-track job offer. And so she will begin as an assistant professor in African American history at Appalachian State University. So we're so proud of both of them from the Proctor program and University of Florida. So at this point, I think I will turn the floor over to Annemarie and to Raja.
Thank you, Paul. And we look forward to hearing from you again in August.
Can't hear you. Hey, Raja, we can't hear you. Not yet.
How about now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, awesome. Okay, great. Sorry about that. Again, yeah, I am Raja Rahim. I had the wonderful opportunity to work with Annemarie in the summer of 2016, right? It seems like a long time ago. Time has really passed, but it was a wonderful opportunity to kind of relaunch the St. Augustine African American History Project via the Sam Proctor Oral History Program. As Dr. Ortiz has already mentioned, there was already work done. There were oral histories with the Jewish rabbis that came down. There were oral histories with past civil rights participants and activists. But a lot of those interviews focused again on civil rights. So what we wanted to do with this project that we launched through the Sam Proctor Oral History Program in the summer of 2016 was to focus on the holistic or the totality of the Black community in St. Augustine, and not just only interviewing about the impact and their role in the civil rights movement, the people who lived there, their role in the civil rights movement, but also getting a full history, right? From segregation to freedom, from slavery to freedom. As much as information as we could collect, we wanted to do so. And we came up with a lot of topics and themes and questions that we asked, and we got great information. We've done powerful interviews, just, as an introduction, to just give you all a cap of that program. And I'm gonna let Annemarie jump in now before we kind of, just talk more about our work that summer and where the project has kind of evolved to today.
Yeah, thanks for that great introduction, Raja. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll say Raja was an excellent leader. She knew what she was doing, and she really guided us. She guided me through this process. And I'm here where I am today a lot because of her and her guidance. So I want to say thank you to you, Raja, because I had a great summer that summer with you for lots of different reasons, but just working with you. You're just a lovely person to work with.
Thank you.
I'll say one of the wonderful things about this project is, and I think that Dr. Ortiz did a wonderful job of introducing um, how important the civil rights movement, and when we think about the civil rights movement, right, we think about from Brown v. Board to the Voting Rights Act. But I think what this project really did for me, and I think what it'll do for you as you kind of dive into it, is to show that there were these people who have lived in St. Augustine in communities like Lincolnville and West St. Augustine for a long time, right? Fort Mose, we have this really vibrant population of emancipated people, and it's all the way until now. It's still this really vibrant community, and so I think one of the things is we were talking to everyday people like you and me, and some of these folks really um, they stuck their necks out there and they put their lives on the line to say like this is wrong and I want better for myself. And some of these kids were at like high school. They were kids. They were in high school. I will never forget interviewing Gloria Thomas. She's just this woman who lives in St. Augustine. When we interviewed her in 2016, she had a son who was in his mid 40s, and she talks about being a high school student, and how she marched and how she got to meet Dr. King, and she kept saying his hands were as soft as cotton. And it was, gave me chill bumps to hear her, this woman in her late 60s at this point, talking about her experience doing things that are just like incredibly dangerous because she knew that this was important for her. And I'll say, like, we talk a lot about struggle, but I think one of the things that you'll learn from this project is also a lot about joy and resiliency. Just like the joy and the beauty and the resistance that exists in Lincolnville. So I think you all will really enjoy this project.
And I have to just add, yeah, that oral history with Miss Thomas definitely stands out, Miss Gloria Thomas. It definitely stands out because of the stories that she told. And just to give you all more information, I know Annemarie can go more in depth, but it was so moving because it was the first time in her life that she had told about her experience being involved in the movement. And she happened to do it in front of her son, as Annemarie mentioned. And that was powerful for him because he was seeing a whole new side of his mother that he did not know existed, and that the impact of her involvement in the things that she witnessed and experienced really had on her. And in the middle of the interview, and this was a new experience for me, having some oral history experience before starting this project. But she broke down crying and telling her story, right? And that goes to show how memory works, how trauma still exists, how stories and expressing those stories and getting them out there can really be a form of release and relief. And that was what it was, in my opinion, for her. And that's what at least I felt in that moment, because she was able to finally share her story. And again, she was 16 years old. She walked out of high school, and that was the moment, she got involved along with her sister. And it's very powerful to hear. So I definitely hope that you all have the opportunity and, to listen to the interviews that we have recorded and taken through the process of being made public and accessible. And so I can talk a lot about the project. Just for myself, but I definitely want to, let you all know that feel free to ask questions at any given moment um, about the project, about things that we occurred. And I just want to also say that, I learned a lot from Annemarie too, right? And that I gained a wealth of knowledge and experience from working with her. We were really a team, a partnership. If you saw one, you saw the other. many times. And if you didn't see one, 9 times out of 10, when you saw someone who lived in that community that we came across, became familiar, they asked, where's, they saw me, where's Annemarie, and I was like, well, she's doing X, Y, and Z right now, or she's interviewing someone else, or, she's riding her bike and enjoying the weather. Sometimes we really enjoy being there. So definitely want to let you know, feel free to ask any questions that you all have as we talk about the project more. So with that being said, does anyone have any questions thus far?
Any questions? See one in the back there.
Hi, I wonder if you could just tell us, was the neighborhood that you mentioned Lincolnville? Is that what the black neighborhood that you said had been there for generations? What was the neighborhood?
Lincolnville.
Lincolnville. Is that how would you put the place relative, say, to downtown St. Augustine, the casino, for example? Where is it located?
It's immediately.
In the microphone.
Okay, if I can find the microphone.
On the stand?
No, here. Is it working?
Sorry.
Hold on. Lincolnville is very close to downtown. It's quite a large area, and it's an area that is gentrifying, to say the least. But if you were driving into St. Augustine from Gainesville, you would probably turn off US 1 on King. And then if you would take the very first right past now the distillery, and then go 2 or 3 blocks and turn left, you would be in Lincolnville. And it is a fascinating story, and there are a number of books about it. But David Nolan was one of the pioneers in terms of interpreting that history. And I recall many years ago being taken by David to various houses that Martin Luther King slept in during his visits there. He was always under threat, and so he never slept in the same home twice. He would move around for security reasons. But the suggestion that you visit the museum there is a very good one. There's also a great place to have breakfast there, but I can't think of the name of it right this minute. But Lincolnville is close to downtown, but it's between US 1 and the road. Any other questions at this point? Okay, back to the 2 speakers. You have more to add at this point?
Raja, do you want to talk a little bit about, or I can talk a little bit about maybe what it was like it was a working class community?
Yeah, sure. Jump right in.
Yeah, well, so to give you a little bit of historical background, it was a working class community. It was largely African American, but there were also Sicilian and Spanish immigrant pockets that lived there. And it was largely maritime. So these folks would work on the docks, and they were watermen. So, or maybe did some longshoreman sort of type work. But what we were talking about, the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center was Excelsior High School, which was um, a really important school. It was an important place for the community. And then there are also several churches that are also there that you can go and see. I'm blanking on it. I think it's St.
St. Paul.
Okay, St. Paul's, and then the Catholic Church is at St. Cyprian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So those are also really important places for the community, but they are also still functioning churches. So, but the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center is a great place for you to go and maybe learn a little bit about the civil rights movement there, but also about life, you know, pre-civil rights, like Dr. Ortiz said, from antebellum, Reconstruction, Jim Crow. So, yeah.
And as a follow up, oh, I see a raised hand, so I will take that first.
I wonder if you could comment on the summer of 1964 when Ralph Abernathy and Martin Luther King were arrested in St. Augustine. It was quite a, I don't know all the details in it, but apparently there was quite a brouhaha over it.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so the summer of 1964, as it was already mentioned, was considered the hotbed at that time of the civil rights movement. Um, from a national, larger standpoint, as we know, Reverend Martin Luther King, and other civil rights leaders were working to try to get the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed with President Lyndon B. Johnson at the time. And St. Augustine, the people already living in St. Augustine, and that's one of the most important things that I think is that we should remember when we think about the civil rights movement and we think about the history of St. Augustine, that the people from Lincolnville, the people who already lived in the community, were already protesting. They were already holding their own sit-ins and swim-ins and wade-ins at the beaches there before the arrival of Martin Luther King. And one of the reasons that Martin Luther King came was because in many ways, the St. Augustine movement was so hot. It was full of resistance from both sides. A lot of the interviews that we did that talked about that resistance, of the fact that coming into conflicts with the African American community of Lincolnville, coming into conflict with the KKK at the time, and the incidents that happened. And so on the larger scope of the movement, and when we think about what nonviolence meant to Martin Luther King and why he used nonviolence, St. Augustine at the time did not have much of a quote unquote nonviolence atmosphere or form of resistance. African Americans there were willing to, what we know through some historians, were willing to fight back or was willing to shoot back to protect their lives, their communities, their families, their businesses. And so, yes, that's what brings Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders to St. Augustine to join the movement, to kind of simmer down the tension there. And again, we have to know that Martin Luther King was not only was he smart in the sense of academics and knowledge and rhetoric, but he was smart in the way that he organized and way other civil rights leaders organized the movement. He went where the most attention was happening, and that happened to be St. Augustine. And being that he was the face of the movement, it is no other place where people who are already on the ground fighting for their equality, their equity, their freedom, their dignity, their humanity. It is no other better place to go where people are already moving and shaking in that sense, right? Already making things happen for themselves, where they already are bringing media attention to that particular struggle. And so Martin Luther King definitely comes down there. He gets arrested along with other civil rights leaders. And when I say civil rights leaders, I like to include the people that we don't know the names of, right? The foot soldiers of St. Augustine. If you do have an opportunity to go to St. Augustine and visit the Plaza of La Constitution, then you will be able to see the memorials and the statues that they put up to represent the unknown names of the movement in St. Augustine, the civil rights movement. And that's another reason why Annemarie and myself was really interested in talking to the people who were on the ground, who were already living in the community and who are still living in that particular community. So yes, a lot of the photos that you see, or the iconic photo of Martin Luther King sitting in the police car with the police dog, the K9, for example, that is happening in St. Augustine. If you do visit the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center, you'll be able to see his police record. In the time that he was arrested in St. Augustine, they actually have the actual police reports there that you can see. And so, yeah, Martin Luther King pretty much comes into a community that is already heavily involved in fighting for their civil rights. And another thing is that Martin Luther King is known in this community among some of the individuals who live there. I had an opportunity to do an interview with a nurse by the name of Miss Janie Price, and she um, talked about young Martin Luther King, that she met him at the age of 16 when he was in Atlanta while she was working and getting her nursing degree at Grady Hospital there. But she talks about Martin Luther King coming to St. Augustine. If you really want to know the location of Lincolnville, and want to really be in the heart of Lincolnville and want to know where it is actually at in St. Augustine, you can Google or search two things. The Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center, it'll drop you right in the heart of the Lincolnville community. And then you can also put in Martin Luther King Drive, because that particular street that goes through the Lincolnville community is one of the only streets in the United States that is named in Martin Luther King's honor, that he actually walked on, and actually had a residence, in a sense. When I say residence, not an actual house, but stayed on that street with the people who lived in that community. And one of those individuals was Miss Janie Price. And she talks about that experience and how Martin Luther King was literally, we're talking about, this is he dies at a young age. So he's in his late 20s. He's still a young person who is taking over this movement. And so she gives us a more personal account of who Martin Luther King was. I mean, Annemarie mentioned how Gloria Thomas met him, right? This, from her background and her perspective, it was an icon, someone she heard about and read about, but she had never met. But when she had the opportunity to do so, of the awe. Whereas Miss Janie Price tells the story as someone very personal. Oh, I knew him. I watched him grow up, down to his, love interest a little bit, just to be that transparent. But that's how close their relationship was. And she talks about Martin Luther King being a regular person who would come back after a march and watch TV until he could fall asleep. Because, just to kind of calm his emotions. So yeah, it's Martin Luther King and his narrative and being arrested is a great story, but it's only a part of this larger St. Augustine African American history that's happening there. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Another way you could access that, I'm sure, is by Googling Lincolnville National Register Historic District, because I believe it's individually listed as a district, and that would give you a great deal of information about it. There are other questions. We're about at end time. If not, would you be willing to tell us something about Southern Foodways Alliance, which has nothing to do with St. Augustine?
I'd be happy to. Southern Foodways Alliance, we are a food media nonprofit. We're an institute in the center of the study of Southern culture here at the University of Mississippi. That's where I am. So it's also known as Ole Miss. And so we document, study, and explore the foodways of the American South. So, in my job specifically, I have the great fortune to go around and interview people about the food that they make and grow and eat and serve. I'm working on a project right now on oyster farmers in Wakulla County. So I'm 8 interviews in there. We're interviewing international restaurant owners in Memphis, Tennessee as well. And I've done lots of different kinds of projects, interviewed folks who have worked as waiters and waitresses for 20 or more years. We have lots of barbecue and interviews. And you can follow along with us at our website is southernfoodways.org. And I'm going to put that in our channel here. But that's a little bit about us and a little bit about what I do.
Well, thank you. I've heard a great deal about the work you're doing, and I applaud you. Thank you so much. Thanks to both of you for being with us today, and thank you for those in the room, in Oak Room, and those on Zoom, and look forward to next week and the Conference of Rabbis in St. Augustine.